Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television with me, Frank Pereira. Well, India's most successful internet entrepreneurs, Flipkart's Sachin Bansal and Bhavish Agarwal of Ola, have raised the banner of nationalism in their fight against foreign origin rivals, urging the government to design policies which will favor homegrown companies. The coordinated push amounts to seeking protectionist support from the government against US internet giants Amazon and Uber. The two poster boys of Indian internet defined their battle as one in which capital plays the most important part and not innovation, implying that the US companies are burning cash in a price war. On this edition of The Big Picture, we'll discuss if Indian startups should be given protection against foreign firms. Joining me on the program today are TK Arun, editor, Opinion Economic Times; Mahesh Gupta, former president, PhD Chambers and chairman, Kent RO Systems; J. Sai Deepak, advocate, Delhi High Court; and we are also joined by Rahul, Chandra, managing director, Helion Advisors Private Limited. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being a part of this edition of The Big Picture. TK Arun, I'd like to start with you, of course. The murmur, started some time back, when startups said that they should get protection. Indian startups should get protection from giants like Amazon and Uber and so on and so forth. But this is the first time where we've seen this being publicly spoken about. What prompted this, do you think?
No, clearly it is the effect of competition. And the effect not being entirely favorable for some companies. I would say a demand for a level playing field is entirely justified, entirely valid. But beyond that, to say that because one company calls itself Indian, it should get protection, that's not how a business works anymore. Okay, there is a problem of somebody having an unlimited supply of capital, but the same fund of capital that funds your foreign competitor also funds you. The so-called Indian companies are also financed by the same sources of capital.
Yes.
So it's a question of, who is able to bring in more capital, who is able to have a nimbler business process, who understands the local situations better. So you should compete on that. But if there are some issues where the playing field is not level, that of course should be addressed.
Sai Deepak, is there a level playing field right now at the moment as things stand?
See, as far as startups are concerned, I think at least given the backdrop in which this question is being asked, the one thing that we have to understand is this request comes from a certain segment of the industry which survives entirely on cycle of investments. And they function on wafer-thin margins and sometimes non-existent margins. And this is an industry that suffers from extreme attrition. And it's also an industry where sometimes the top management is accused of perhaps benefiting the most in terms of making the best of pay scales from each cycle of investment. So unless and until some of these issues are addressed and we ask ourselves, is there any other way in which this business can be run better? To immediately expect help or support or some kind of crutch from the government in this day and age, I think would be really difficult, and I don't think it's warranted. Asking for a level playing field is one thing, but asking for some kind of protectionism, I don't think works, and I don't think should be entertained or encouraged at all. Because that only encourages the mindset of a trader and not that of an entrepreneur, there being a clear difference between the two. And we need to encourage entrepreneurship more than just the mindset of a trader. We need to move to the next level, and that's not going to come with protectionism. Asking for some kind of support from the government to help fund innovation is a different question.
Yes.
Altogether, but asking the government to use its clout to fend off competition, I'm not for it at all, one bit.
What kind of innovation can really Flipkart or Ola bring to the table? See, then you have to categorize startups in a separate way, isn't it? Mr. Mahesh Gupta, say for instance protection can be given. How far can we go to give Indian entrepreneurs protection? Should they be given protection? How far can we bend the rules?
It would depend upon which category of entrepreneur we are looking at. If we are looking at giants like Ola and Flipkart, I don't think you require a protection at there. Because you are yourself so big and you yourself have so many investors coming from all over the world, why do you require protection? But certainly, I have a grudge against all these people who are burning money. They're going against all norms and losing money. That's not something which is favorable in the Indian system. They are destroying the whole business system of the country. The retail business is being spoiled. They come out with certain prices which are below their purchase price, and they are fighting war there. So no government can come out with a policy wherein they can take care of fighting war between the two individuals. So there should be some laws which tell that these companies, you can't burn money like this. You have to have a certain system wherein you have to make yourself profitable rather than keep giving deep discounts which are not sustainable to you. So that's the real situation. So I don't think we require to have a system where we need to protect A or B. But certainly a person who is an indigenous person and there is a company which is an overseas company with a deeper pockets and they want to wash out one company, well, we certainly need to look at it, what protection we can give them.
TK Arun, is it time to categorize these startups and then say, for instance, maybe manufacturing startup can get some kind of protection from the government, because let's not forget that a manufacturing startup will also, can also innovate and then therefore contribute. But whereas the services sector, what kind of innovation are we looking at really?
See, an import duty is a form of protection that domestic manufacturers get. So, plus they have other advantages of knowing the local customer, of having a distribution network and all that. Now, let us also look at this from the point of view of a company like Zomato, which is an India-based company, which has gone abroad and is now trying to expand to as many territories as possible. How would we like it if local competitors of Zomato in those countries were to raise protection barriers? And how would Zomato like it? The Indian government made it easy by itself following a policy that others would find easy to replicate against Zomato. So we have to look at things in terms of a level playing field. Now, for Indian business, the world is actually its playing field. They should be able to have the imagination to
no
and
boundaries.
the capacity to think big and operate big. Funds are available, talent is available more in India than elsewhere. So it's up to actually your entrepreneurial daring and imagination to do business on a scale that is possible. But like there are many problems that domestic industry faces, especially if you are small, which might need some kind of compensatory support from the government. So that should always be looked into, for which we have certain policies. Over and above your import duty, you have a special additional duty to take care of the incidents of domestic taxation that Indian companies face. So there are many such things which are rudimentary in place. Now, on policy on FDI and retail actually says that you cannot actually discount products. The retail chain or the marketplace cannot actually discount. They cannot subsidize the sale of the product. The subsidy has to come from the seller. So these policies are in place. I think we need a level playing field, and that is what really requires close scrutiny. And here, the Competition Commission of India should play a more active role to make sure that the competition is actually fair.
Indeed, indeed. Sai Deepak, as far as any protectionism is concerned, if the government does bring it into being and if it decides to protect, some of these entrepreneurs because they have played the nationalism card yet again, will it stand scrutiny in court?
See, protectionism, and certainly within the realm of the legal framework, has severe consequences, and there are several implications. First of all, you'd be triggering a race of sorts between several countries where there will be retaliation from other countries as well, because if everybody were to start raising the nationalistic bogey in the context of entrepreneurship and so on and so forth, I'm not sure how that will go down well, particularly in the backdrop of our own obligations, treaty obligations under the WTO, TRIPS and so on and so forth. Because if somebody were to use trade barriers as a way of protecting their own national interest, or if they get protectionist about it, you end up setting the ball rolling as far as international dispute resolution is concerned. So that's one thing. And what kind of a message are you sending out to people in terms of foreign investors and in terms of your investment atmospherics? If you're saying that now with respect to a certain segment of the industry, just because they are burning cash, I'd like to come out with protectionist measures. That's one. Two, to take forward the discussion with respect to the Competition Commission, predatory pricing is one thing that e-commerce industries and e-commerce business has sometimes been accused of. Fairly or not, rightly or wrong is a different question.
Yes.
But these are not issues that the Competition Commission can just seize unless and until certain de minimis conditions are satisfied within the realm of the Competition Act. So for instance, you'll have to be someone who's in a position of dominance, and your act of predatory pricing would amount to abuse of dominance provided you're in a position of dominance. So these are questions that the court has to look into, or the Competition Commission has to look into. But the point is, if we keep doing this, on one hand, we keep talking about a culture of innovation needs to be brought into. Now, innovation, when there is large scope for innovation in the manufacturing industry, is perhaps easier to discuss, even in the small scale context or even in the context of startups. In the services industry, you only have a certain set of cards that you've been dealt with and you'll have to make do with it. That is the nature of the business. And that is the nature of the business that you have willingly assumed in the form of a risk. Now, the moment you start seeing the limits of the risk, you can't expect the government to step in each time asking for a bailout. That's not possible. You took the plunge to step into the business knowing fully well that the scope for innovation is limited. And I'll just add one point here.
Sure.
During the recession, the big recession that was going on in the United States and in Europe, and which is still, I think, is still work in progress, the one thing that I think people need to read is the German government's policy as to how they'd like to deal with recession. Most countries say there's no point in investing in R&D during the course of recession because you're burning cash into something that may not have immediate dividends. But that country chose to invest in higher education, research, innovation, and particularly giving impetus to innovation in small-scale industries and in startups. Because that is where, pushed to the limits, when you have paucity of resources, people have to think out of the box and come out with innovation.
Yes.
That is the nature of the business. And which is why you look for innovation to come from startups. Silicon Valley owes its existence and its halo to startups and not to the biggies. Biggies were startups at some point of time who chose to throw their weight behind innovation. So I think we need to focus more on innovation and see how is it that the government can leverage its policies to give an impetus to innovation in all forms, in all segments. Of course, innovation in each segment will be different, but how is it that you can help it? I don't think bailouts are the best idea possible.
Indeed. I think that's what we've all decided here, that bailouts are not the best option. But we are now joined by Rahul Chandra, Managing Director of Helion Advisors as well. They are a venture capitalist firm. Rahul, as far as venture capitalists are concerned, how do you look at this whole scenario where Flipkart and Ola have come out and said that they need protection from the government? How do venture capitalists look at this?
Hi, Frank. I think some of the points that I'm hearing are very good points, and I agree with most of them. But the venture capitalist view actually has developed over time, and I would represent the more start kind of innovative capital that will go in early. But these two companies are obviously much further along, and they have they've grown to become giants, and their dependency on capital has gone way beyond what investors in India can provide. They are relying on large capital sources, which would fund comparable assets across the world. There is no reason why they're doing this because it is in India or because it's in a certain category. It's because they expect a certain return to come out of this. They did not actually invest assuming that India has a protected market. They invested because they thought that we are backing a potential leader or a company where they will make quite returns on their investment. What has happened over time, though, is that there, like in various markets around the world, there is a complete realization that the Indian market is the largest and the most fastest growing consumption market in the world. It's the largest. After the US, China, India is it. There is no other market as big as India. So it's become the fancy of global giants across the world, and everybody wants to have a piece of this market. Which then brings into question, which is how much priority should an Amazon or an Uber place on the Indian market? And as we all know, what has happened is that they had a tough time in China, because of local rules and competition, and also what is easier in China to compete with, which is local capital. Here's the complicated part of this argument, I believe, and like I said, I agree with most of the points the other panelists are making, and that is that capital does not follow a level playing field. I think once the large investors have realized that it's become at the end of the day a battle between the infinite fundraising capability of these global giants, which is Amazon and Uber, and the investor capital base. They are two very imbalanced sources. So there is a growing awareness that we are competing with very deep pockets. Even though we are investing in India, but we are having a battle royale, if you will, in this market. So there is, in the last 6 months to 1 year, there has been a gradual withdrawal of these investors, and so capital is not level between what an Indian company can source and what an Amazon and Uber can source, because it's playing on a much big global canvas.
Indeed. All right. Fair
so
enough.
I think it's a little bit complicated when it comes to the fact that these companies are really creating markets with this capital.
Indeed, fair enough. So isn't the onus then, Mr. Gupta, on the domestic companies or the Indian companies to ensure that they bring in this capital? That's when they think out of the box, put on their thinking caps on, and then find ways to bring in this capital.
Absolutely. Many companies, overseas companies, have invested in these companies. They need to protect that capital, because if these companies do not do well, they will lose out. So they are the source of capital for these companies. But to my mind, the most important thing for Indian companies to look at it is to cash on their advantages. Their advantages, they understand consumer better than the Amazon can understand. A. B. You need to innovate how to provide a better service. You can't remain in an e-commerce site without providing a better service. Only providing a discount is not an answer to it. So somebody needs to change the game. You can't be following, somebody is competing, you can't be following his steps and then go down. You need to chart out your own path and create a separate path which is not following the competition. I think they need to innovate in that direction and find a better solution.
Is that happening? Do you see that happening amongst Indian companies, Arun, where they're trying to innovate, trying to think out of the box?
Well, it certainly happened in China. Uber had to actually leave with his tail tucked firmly between his legs. Didi beat Uber. Now finally, Uber has taken a minority stake in Didi and has left the Chinese market. So just having money to invest and being able to subsidize an operation doesn't guarantee success. So that is a lesson for Ola in India too. And for, say, e-commerce companies. For example, if I buy some product on Flipkart or Amazon, and after some time that product goes bad, how do I get it serviced? This is not something which is widely advertised in the local market, for which there are service centers which are commonly available. Then how do I actually get this done? I don't know. Now, if some online e-commerce platform can actually show people, we will take care of this, he'll have an advantage. Now, why don't they look at things like this to differentiate themselves and provide a better value to consumer? So you need to be able to compete on those kind of things which make you more comfortable vis-a-vis the consumer's expectations, vis-a-vis the competitor. So I think there is scope for people to compete rather than to complain.
Sai, you wanted to make a point?
Yes, just one point. The point is, if we were to accept this argument of protectionism that's been raised by e-commerce entities, what stops the brick and mortar retail stores from saying that we too need to be protected?
Yes.
If the argument with respect to brick and mortar stores is that no, you have to keep pace with times because this is where the world is moving, and that's the argument that e-commerce entities seem to be making with respect to brick and mortar stores, then this is the same argument that needs to be applied to them as well when they're faced with better competition.
Indeed.
And
same argument with the taxi services as well, the black and
everybody
yellow.
can say this.
Yes, everybody can
say
say
the
it.
point is, where do you stop? This is a slippery slope. And as Sir rightly said, the one advantage that you always have when you're playing on home pitch is that you know the pitch. In which case, you know the conditions. You've been there before. These are your people. Invest more in market research. Invest more in data analytics. Have a data scientist on board to understand the choices of consumers better. See how is it that you can reach out to those untapped markets previously. I'll just draw from one example, and perhaps this is an unorthodox example. One of the reasons that the current dispensation won with such huge margins in Uttar Pradesh in the 2014 elections is because they managed to reach out to those parts of Uttar Pradesh which previously people had never tapped into before, because there was an innovative strategy there. Therefore, it was a question of taking your message to the audience. I think our entrepreneurs have a lot to learn from these kind of strategies, to ask themselves, how do I go beyond the tier 1 cities? How do I go to tier 2 cities? How do I reach out to other aspects of the market? This is a population, to put it in that famous phrase, Sawa crore ka population. So you really have a huge local market that you can cater to. Do that first. And if you're able to do this here with its diverse interests and its diverse tastes, the world is your oyster. You can do whatever you want.
Indeed, indeed. Rahul, Chandra, be proactive. Don't be reactive. Be the first one to go out there and do something new, and automatically you can reap the benefits out of that, is what we are saying here.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's true for most of the companies we look at, and Flipkart and Ola, when they started, there was Uber or Amazon in India, so they were doing something which was at least comparatively new. I mean, it was happening in other parts of the world. But I think this argument is maybe happening too late, anyways, in the day, and there's not much that can be done by the government, given how much inroads and it will send such a wrong message. But let's for a moment look at the implications if Ola and Flipkart were to give way to Amazon and Uber. It'll do two things. One is that it will push back India's venture capital growth story several years out, because the late stage investors who have come into India and backed these two companies, and again, I that it is unfair to ask for protectionism now, but it will send several years forward what has happened miraculously in India, which is created a market of. We, I think, have a large consumer internet market which has appeared 5 years too early because of the amount of capital that has gone in. Yes, indeed, it has gone and burned. It has led to large losses, but the fact today that we have supply chains catering to the remotest parts of India's, and anybody from any part of India can order online. It's happened because so much capital has gone in such a period of time. It will push back this investor interest that has happened from the late stage folks who can create markets in India. That capital will slowly develop in India. It's not there yet, and I think it's important to have global investors look at India's tech economy. And number two, it will have a flow-over effect to the younger companies. If they don't have large markets getting built for them and late-stage investors who are interested in India, they will have a future which is much smaller than otherwise. So I think we should keep in mind that these two examples of Flipkart and Uber are just the two, and Ola are the two biggest that we have coming out of the Indian stable so far, and they've followed a certain journey. And it's very important actually to see them successful.
Indeed, it's a valid point that he's making, Mr. Gupta. If you bring in protectionist measures against startups at the moment, now what happens to future startups then?
No, absolutely. I don't think you need to protect, but if it's small companies, you certainly need to have a little bit of a protection. If US can today talk of protecting their workforce, there is nothing wrong in protecting your genuine startups. After all, they are incubators. If we have people in incubation and we have people who are still trying to walk, I think we need to protect those guys, but not the people who have grown up. So somewhere we need to make this difference.
Is that a valid argument, Arun? Because we saw, Bansal also making this argument, saying that, after Trump, the US is also going to do the same. The UK is also going to do the same. So why not India also do something like that?
See, if you look at the global economy, capital is plentiful. Avenues for deploying capital profitably are few. So people are desperately looking for ways to deploy their funds and get decent returns. So actually it's up to our entrepreneurs to provide those opportunities. So we don't believe in restricting capital entry into this country. Successive governments have gradually liberalized FDI entry into various sectors of the economy. This government has aggressively opened up that era. So more and more capital can come in, improve the prospects of new businesses succeeding, and those businesses in turn will create value for not only the investors abroad, but also for their domestic employees, domestic shareholders, and a whole lot of people who avail of their services and products. So this is a great way of actually improving life in the globalized way of doing business. I don't think we should put any crimps in that just because a couple of companies are finding it difficult, and that might be transient. These are amazing companies. I mean, they have come up this far without any protection, and I'm sure they'll be able to succeed further also without any crutches. Now you look at Paytm. Now Paytm is a great company. It has grown at a phenomenal rate. Now it has become so successful. Its servers are now slow in scanning the QR code. That is only actually a sign of success. They should overcome that. Now, would other e-payment wallets in India be justified in saying, "Oh, let us protect them against Paytm"? Because Paytm has foreign investors. No, so there is a point beyond which you cannot stretch this logic. Because every company in India actually has a large amount of foreign capital, whether it's HDFC Bank and ICICI Bank, from those to all the startup companies, we have made foreign capital a part of our overall financial ecosystem. Now you cannot differentiate on the basis of this company being foreign funded or being Indian funded.
Indeed. And to take what you're saying forward, Sai Deepak, it is not just the capital that the foreign firms bring in, it's also the expertise that they bring along with them.
Correct. That's one. Second, the one point I'd just like
I've got 2 minutes, so very quick. Let's be brief. Yes.
So it's like this. If let's say you are someone who's a new entity in the market and there's a biggie, and the biggie is in a position to spend lots of money on advertisement and flood newspapers, are you going to ask the government to create a separate space for advertisement because you're a small entity? That's the kind of argument that we're making. Secondly, protectionism is like an unreserved compartment in an Indian train. Everybody who gets in first and gets a seat doesn't want the other person to get a seat. He'll never get out of that place. That's the nature of protectionism. Three, I do believe that there is a lot of scope for innovation. And importantly, as far as the competition regime is concerned, or even the legal framework is concerned, it is not meant to protect any particular player or any class of players. It is meant to protect the consumer at the end of the day so that he doesn't run out of choices. That is the mandate of the Competition Commission or the competition regime in general. So we need to ask ourselves, protectionism, citing Trump or somebody else might seem good, but what does it do for consumer choice and domestic interest at the end of the day? Domestic interest is consumer choice.
Fair enough, point taken. Rahul, Chandra, closing comments from you. I've got just 1 minute left on the program.
Yeah, Frank, I think the this ask is a very interesting ask. And like I said, what I would be most worried about is that these two leading lights of the Indian startup ecosystem, everybody turns to them for inspiration. They are in turn going to create lots of entrepreneurs because of people who have worked and helped create these big companies. For their sake and for the sake of the Indian startup ecosystem, I would really want them to survive and do well and thrive, and not not finish the race prematurely.
Indeed. Mr. Gupta, when companies such as Ola and Flipkart, the leaders really in their respective spaces as far as India is concerned, when they bring up issues like this or concerns like this, what do smaller players do? Then close the show for us with your final comments.
Well, it's paining to them, and it's a large investment, so their pain is being reflected in what they're saying. But I think basically policies are not correct. Deep discounts is not a good idea for e-commerce side. Good service is the delivery point. And if they will change their space, they'll be good. And each startup who's coming up must understand that they have to make a differential in the system so that they can market themselves. Unless that differential is being created, that value proposition is being given, they will not succeed.
Indeed. Fair. Yeah, quickly.
See, in the early 90s, when we began the process of economic reform and liberalization, there was a Bombay club of entrenched industrialists who felt that this opening up was going to harm the Indian economy and Indian entrepreneurs. Exactly the opposite happened. Then their complaints vanished.
Yes.
So when a new test and new challenge comes, people are a little scared and they articulate those concerns. That doesn't mean that they are going to go under or they are not going to thrive. I'm sure Flipkart and Ola will thrive and flourish.
Okay, Flipkart and Ola will thrive, and I'm sure all the other startups will thrive as well. Just be different, bring something unique to the table, and you'll do well for yourselves. That's the consensus that we've reached here on this edition of The Big Picture. TK, Arun, Mahesh, Gupta, Jay Sai, Deepak, and Rahul, Chandra, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being on this edition of The Big Picture and putting things into perspective. For us, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for watching.